The war was finally over. After years of bloodshed and countless lives lost, the galaxy was at peace again, or so it seemed. Captain Mark Ryan stood on the bridge of the alien flagship, his heart heavy with the weight of victory. The room was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Alien symbols glowed faintly on the walls, casting an otherworldly light over the gathered crowd. Across from him, the defeated alien leader, Supreme Commander K'tal, knelt in submission. His towering frame, covered in intricate blue scales, looked far less intimidating than it had during the countless battles he had orchestrated. Around him stood his council, their heads bowed in defeat. It was a moment of triumph, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "You've fought well, human," K'tal said in his deep, resonant voice. "Your kind has proven unexpectedly formidable." Mark didn't respond. Compliments from a former enemy felt hollow. He only wanted one thing now: peace. That was what this war had always been about: protecting Earth, humanity, and the fragile alliances they had built. "Let's finalize the terms of your surrender," Mark said firmly, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. He glanced at his translator device, ensuring it captured his words accurately in K'tal's language. There could be no mistakes now. K'tal's lips curled into what might have been a smile or a sneer. "Of course. The terms will be honored. My fleet will disarm, my forces will stand down, and we will retreat to our territories. But there is one final condition." Mark narrowed his eyes. "Condition?" There was no mention of any condition. "It is a matter of tradition," K'tal said, rising to his full height. He loomed over Mark, his presence suddenly imposing again. "In our culture, when a leader surrenders, the victor inherits not only his position, but also his responsibilities. This includes my family." Mark blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Your family?" "Yes," K'tal said, his tone unflinching. "To solidify peace, my wives will become yours." The room fell silent. The human officers behind Mark exchanged uneasy glances, while the alien council members remained expressionless, as if this was a routine part of their surrender agreements. Mark's mind raced. Was this some kind of trick? A trap? Or was K'tal serious? The alien culture was still largely a mystery to humanity, despite the years of war. Customs like this had never been mentioned in any intelligence reports. "I don't understand," Mark said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "How does this ensure peace?" K'tal stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over Mark. "In our society, the leader's family is a symbol of unity and stability. By accepting them, you accept responsibility for their welfare and for the future of our people. It is a gesture of trust." Mark clenched his fists. Trust. After all the destruction K'tal's forces had caused, the word felt like an insult. But before he could respond, the alien wives stepped forward. There were 3 of them, each as striking and mysterious as the last. The first wife, tall and imposing, had a commanding presence that rivaled K'tal's. Her golden eyes seemed to pierce straight through Mark, as if she were judging him and finding him unworthy. The second wife was smaller, with delicate features and a quiet grace. Her sharp, analytical gaze suggested a mind far sharper than anyone in the room. The third wife, however, caught Mark's attention the most. She was cloaked in a flowing silver garment, her face partially hidden by a translucent veil. Her aura was one of mystery, and there was something about her that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. "This is insane," one of Mark's officers whispered behind him. "Captain, you can't seriously consider this." Mark didn't respond. He couldn't. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Was this truly the only way to secure peace? What would the human council say? And what would accepting this tradition mean for his future? "You're asking me to marry them," Mark finally said, his voice low but steady. "It is not a request," K'tal replied, his tone growing colder. "It is the law of my people. Refuse, and the surrender is void. Mark's breath caught in his throat. Void. That meant the war would reignite. More lives lost. More destruction. He glanced back at his crew, at the weary faces of the men and women who had fought by his side for so long. Could he put them through more fighting, just to avoid this bizarre demand? The first wife stepped forward, her golden eyes unblinking. You hesitate, human. Do you not value peace? Or are you afraid? Mark met her gaze, refusing to flinch. I'm not afraid, he said. But this isn't a decision to take lightly. Then take your time, Catal said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But know this, our people are watching. If you reject our ways, they will see it as a rejection of peace itself, and they will fight until there is nothing left of your kind. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Mark's mind raced, searching for a way out of this impossible situation. But no matter which way he looked at it, one thing was clear. This was no longer just a negotiation. It was a test of his leadership, his values, and his willingness to do whatever it took to protect his people. And right now, he had no idea if he could pass it. The impossible choice. Captain Mark Ryan sat in the conference room aboard the human flagship Resolute, his mind spinning from the alien leader's bizarre demand. The room buzzed with the murmurs of his senior officers, their voices low but filled with disbelief. A holographic projection of Catal's terms hovered in the air, the alien text translating into simple yet jarring English. The victor shall inherit the family of the defeated. Mark rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of it all. This wasn't just a cultural quirk, it was a potential political disaster. If he accepted, he'd face backlash from humanity for agreeing to something so alien. If he refused, the tenuous peace might shatter before it even began. Commander Elise Grant, his trusted second-in-command, broke the tense silence. Captain, this is absurd. We can't let their traditions dictate the terms of our victory. We've already won. Mark sighed. It's not that simple, Elise. Catal made it clear, if I reject their terms, the surrender is void. They'll regroup and fight again. We can't afford another war. Elise slammed her hand on the table, her frustration boiling over. So what? You marry 3 alien women and call it diplomacy. This isn't what we signed up for, sir. The other officers nodded in agreement, their faces grim. Lieutenant Harris, the ship's cultural liaison, hesitated before speaking. Actually, Captain, I've been studying their traditions during the war. To the Zarnathians, family is everything. By taking on the leader's family, you're symbolizing unity and trust. It's more than just a marriage. It's a declaration that we're willing to integrate with their people. Mark leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. So you're saying this isn't just some cruel joke? They're serious about this. They're deadly serious, Harris replied. And refusing them would be seen as an insult, maybe even a declaration of hostility. The weight of the situation pressed down on Mark. He thought back to the battles they had fought, the lives they had lost. His crew, his friends, humanity itself, they had all suffered so much. Could he risk it all by saying no? All right, Mark said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. Set up a secure channel with the Earth Council. They need to know about this. Hours later, Mark found himself facing the Earth Council via a live holographic feed. The council members appeared in translucent blue, their faces a mixture of shock and skepticism as they listened to Mark's report. This is unprecedented, one councilwoman said, her tone sharp. Captain Ryan, are you seriously considering this arrangement? I'm not considering it, Mark replied, his voice firm. I'm asking for guidance. If we refuse, the Zarnathians will see it as a betrayal and go back to war. If we accept, we risk setting a dangerous precedent for future negotiations. Another council member, a grizzled general, leaned forward. Captain, do you believe this is the only way to secure peace? Mark hesitated. Yes, sir. I've seen the resolve in Catal's eyes. He's ready to die for his traditions, and his people will follow him. They respect strength and honor above all else. Rejecting this will only fuel their hatred. The council fell into a heated debate, their voices overlapping as they argued the political, ethical, and cultural implications of the situation. Mark watched in silence, his hands clenched into fists. He had never felt so powerless, trapped between duty and morality. Finally, the council's leader, a calm and measured diplomat, spoke. "Captain Ryan, the council will support your decision, whatever it may be. But understand this. The fate of humanity's relationship with the Zarnathians rests on your shoulders. Choose wisely." The holograms faded, leaving Mark alone in the conference room. He stared at the empty space where the council had been, the weight of their words sinking in. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about humanity's future. Back in his quarters, Mark sat at his desk, staring at the small silver coin he always carried, a keepsake from his father, who had taught him the value of leadership and sacrifice. The faces of the 3 alien wives flashed through his mind. Each of them represented something greater than himself: unity, survival, and the chance for peace. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. It was Commander Grant. "Sir, you need to make a decision. Tall is waiting." Mark nodded, standing up. "Let's go." As he walked to the ship's main bridge, his mind churned with questions. Could he truly go through with this? What would it mean for his life, his crew, his people? And what secrets were these alien wives hiding? The bridge was silent as Mark stepped forward. The holographic image of Catal appeared, his piercing gaze locking onto Mark. The 3 wives stood behind him, their expressions unreadable. "Well, human," Catal said. "Have you decided?" Mark took a deep breath. "I accept your terms, Commander." The tension in the room was palpable as Catal's lips curled into a satisfied smile. "Good. Then let us prepare for the binding ceremony." Mark's heart pounded as the hologram faded. This was only the beginning. Behind the veneer of peace lay a storm of unknown challenges, and he was walking straight into it, meeting the wives. The binding ceremony was a surreal experience for Captain Mark Ryan. Standing in the grand chamber of the Zarnathian flagship, he couldn't help but feel out of place. The walls shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, their shifting colors pulsing in rhythm with a low melodic hum. This was a sacred space for the Zarnathians, one where tradition and honor intertwined. Mark stood in his formal uniform, his face calm, but his mind a storm of questions. As part of the agreement, the 3 wives of Supreme Commander Catal were now to meet Mark as individuals for the first time. The ceremony itself was brief, a symbolic gesture rather than a legal binding. Catal had already stepped aside, leaving Mark and the 3 women to navigate this new and delicate arrangement. One by one, the wives stepped forward, each radiating an aura of uniqueness and power. The first wife, Zara. Zara, the first wife, was tall and statuesque, with golden scales that seemed to reflect the light of the chamber. Her piercing yellow eyes locked onto Mark's, unblinking and intense. There was no warmth in her gaze, only the sharp, calculating look of a warrior who had seen too many battles. "You don't seem like a man who seeks power," Zara said, her voice low and commanding. "So, why are you here?" Mark hesitated. He hadn't expected her to speak so bluntly. "I'm here to secure peace," he replied, "to ensure that neither your people nor mine suffer any more loss." Zara's expression didn't change. "Peace is a noble goal, but nobility doesn't win wars or alliances. If you're weak, the Zarnathians will devour you. And if you're strong, they'll test you until you break." Mark met her gaze evenly. "I didn't lead humanity to victory by being weak." A flicker of respect crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant. Zara stepped back without another word, her evaluation of Mark unfinished. The second wife, Lyanna. Next came Lyanna, the second wife. She was the opposite of Zara in every way. Where Zara was fierce and imposing, Lyanna was serene and elegant. Her silver scales shimmered like moonlight, and her movements were graceful, almost hypnotic. She carried a small tablet in her hands, which she tapped lightly as she approached Mark. "I've read about humans," Lyanna said softly. Her voice was calm, but her words carried an undercurrent of curiosity. "You're a species of contradictions, capable of great violence and great compassion. Which side of you am I speaking to now?" Mark allowed himself a small smile. "That depends on what you're hoping to find." Lyanna tilted her head, studying him with a clinical gaze. "I'm hoping to find someone who understands the weight of what he's taken on. This is more than a political gesture. By accepting us, you've tied your fate to ours. If you fail, it won't just be your people who suffer, it will be ours as well." Mark nodded, her words striking a chord. "I know what's at stake. I wouldn't be here if I didn't." Lyanna seemed satisfied with his answer, though her expression remained neutral. "Good. Then perhaps there is hope for this arrangement." The third wife, Shira. Finally, Shira stepped forward. Unlike the other two, Shira was cloaked in mystery. Her face was partially hidden by a translucent veil, and her dark, iridescent scales seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of the light. She moved with a quiet confidence, her steps light and deliberate. "You're different," Shira said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was almost musical, carrying an air of intrigue. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Shira studied him for a long moment before answering. "You don't carry the same arrogance as most leaders, but you carry something else, something heavier." Mark felt a pang of unease. Shira's gaze seemed to pierce straight through him, as if she could see the doubts and fears he kept buried. "War changes people," he said finally. "I've lost too many friends to feel anything but responsibility for what happens next." Shira nodded, her expression unreadable. "Responsibility is a burden, but it's also a gift. I wonder, will you use it to build or to destroy?" Before Mark could respond, Shira turned and walked away, her veil shimmering like liquid shadow. Of all the wives, she was the hardest to read, and something about her unsettled him. The first test of trust. As the initial meeting ended, Mark felt both relief and apprehension. These women weren't just individuals, they were symbols of their people, each with their own strengths, secrets, and motivations. Winning their trust would be no small task, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The next day, Zara approached Mark in private. "There's something you should know," she said, her tone serious. "Not everyone among our people agrees with this peace. Some see you as a threat, a conqueror who doesn't deserve the position you've taken." Mark frowned. "Are you saying there's opposition to the surrender?" "I'm saying there are those who would rather see you dead than see you lead," Zara replied bluntly. "If you want to survive, you'll need more than words. You'll need allies." Mark's mind raced. Was this a warning, a challenge, or both? He realized that his journey was far from over. Earning the trust of these women and their people would require more than diplomacy. It would require action, courage, and a willingness to face the unknown. Hidden agendas. Captain Mark Ryan couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. The first few days after the binding ceremony had been a whirlwind of formalities, but beneath the polished surface, he could feel the tension simmering. The Zarnathian flagship felt less like a vessel of peace and more like a nest of vipers. Every interaction, every glance from the crew, carried an undercurrent of distrust. It wasn't just the alien crew. Even among the three wives, something felt off. They were polite, cooperative even, but Mark sensed that each of them was holding something back. Their conversations were guarded, their movements deliberate. He couldn't tell whether they were testing him or hiding something far more dangerous. The warning. The unease turned to alarm one evening when Zara, the first wife, approached Mark in the private quarters assigned to him. Her golden eyes gleamed in the dim light, and her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "You need to watch your back," she said, her tone as sharp as a blade. Mark frowned, leaning against the desk. "What are you talking about?" Zara crossed her arms, her gaze sweeping the room as if checking for unseen listeners. Not everyone in Katal's command agreed with his decision to surrender. There are factions within our ranks who see you as a usurper. They think you'll use this union as a way to control us, to weaken us. Mark felt his jaw tighten. And what do you think? Zara's expression was unreadable. I think you're not like the others. But it doesn't matter what I think. The ones who oppose you won't stop until you're dead. The weight of her words sank in. He had expected resistance, but outright assassination attempts. That was a different level of danger. Do you know who's behind it? Mark asked. Zara shook her head. Not yet, but I can feel it. The way they look at you, the way they talk when they think no one is listening. They're planning something. The silent threat. Later that night, Mark couldn't sleep. He replayed Zara's warning in his mind, wondering if it was a test or a genuine plea. As he paced the room, he noticed a faint clicking sound, almost imperceptible. He froze, his instincts kicking in. Slowly, he traced the noise to the wall near his bed. There, hidden in the shadows, was a small device, Sarnathian in design. A spy bug. Mark's blood ran cold. Someone was listening, watching, perhaps even planning his next move before he made it. He carefully removed the device and placed it in a sealed container, intending to analyze it later. But the discovery only confirmed what he already knew. He was being hunted, and he couldn't trust anyone completely, not even the wives. A fragile alliance. The next day, Mark gathered the 3 wives in a secured room aboard the human flagship. His tone was firm, but measured as he addressed them. Someone is plotting against me, he said, placing the spy device on the table for them to see. I need to know if any of you are involved. The room fell into silence. Zara was the first to speak, her voice filled with disdain. If I wanted you dead, Captain, you wouldn't be standing here. Lyanna, the second wife, studied the device with interest. This isn't surprising. There are factions within our people who don't trust humans. But accusing us without proof isn't going to help your situation. Shira, the third wife, remained silent, her veil hiding her expression. Mark couldn't tell whether her quiet demeanor was guilt or something else entirely. I'm not accusing anyone, Mark said, his voice steady. But if we're going to make this work, I need to know where you stand. I need to know I can trust you. Zara scoffed. Trust is earned, not given. You've done nothing to earn mine. Lyanna's expression softened. We're not your enemies, Mark. But if you want our help, you need to be honest with us. What are you really trying to achieve here? Mark hesitated. I'm trying to keep the peace, to protect both our people. That's all I want. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Shira finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Trust is a two-way street, Captain. If you want ours, you'll have to show us yours. The ambush. That evening, Mark decided to take a calculated risk. He arranged a meeting with Zara in a secluded part of the ship to discuss what she knew about the rogue factions. But as he arrived, he quickly realized something was wrong. The lights flickered, and the air felt colder than usual. Zara, he called out, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. From the shadows, a figure emerged, not Zara, but a Sarnathian soldier, his weapon aimed directly at Mark. You shouldn't have come here, human, the soldier hissed. Before Mark could react, several more figures stepped out, surrounding him. Their intentions were clear. This was no negotiation. It was an execution. Mark's mind raced as he calculated his options. He was outnumbered, and his weapon wouldn't last against their advanced energy shields. But just as he prepared for the worst, a sudden burst of light filled the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of Sarnathian weapons firing. Zara appeared, her golden scales gleaming as she fought off the attackers with a ferocity that took even Mark by surprise. Within moments, the ambushers were either dead or subdued. Zara turned to Mark, her breathing heavy but her expression calm. I told you to watch your back. she said, her tone almost scolding. Mark nodded, still catching his breath. Thanks for the save. But why help me? Zara smirked. I don't trust you, Captain. But I hate traitors more. Unlikely allies. The ambush changed everything for Captain Mark Ryan. It wasn't just the attack itself. It was the fact that Zara, the most skeptical of the three wives, had saved his life. The act spoke volumes, not just about her loyalty, but about the dangerous fractures within the Zarnathian society. Mark realized that survival wasn't just about winning over the alien population. It was about navigating a labyrinth of shifting alliances and hidden agendas. The next morning, Mark called a private meeting with all three wives. The conference room aboard the human flagship Resolute was dimly lit, the atmosphere tense. He had questions, and he needed answers. Breaking the silence. I know about the factions working against me, Mark began, his voice steady but firm. The attack last night proves how far they're willing to go, but I can't fight this war alone. If this union is going to mean anything, I need your help. The three wives exchanged glances, each responding in her own way. Zara leaned back in her chair, her golden eyes glinting with challenge. Lyanna folded her hands in front of her, her expression calm and measured. Shira, as always, remained silent, her veil hiding any hint of her thoughts. Help. Zara scoffed, breaking the silence. You're asking us to fight your battles now. Mark met her gaze without flinching. I'm not asking for your loyalty. I'm asking for your insight. You know your people better than I ever could. If we don't work together, this peace will fall apart before it even starts. Lyanna was the first to respond. He's right, Zara. The factions aren't just a threat to him. They're a threat to all of us. If they succeed in killing him, it'll plunge our people back into chaos. Zara's expression softened, though she didn't respond. Instead, Shira finally spoke, her voice soft but laced with steel. There's more at play here than just the factions. The people are watching, waiting to see if this union is genuine or just a facade. If we don't stand united, they'll never trust him or us. Mark nodded, grateful for the rare input from Shira. Then help me, not for my sake, but for the sake of your people. Tell me what I'm up against. Discovering the enemy. Over the next few days, the wives began to open up, each contributing pieces to the puzzle. Zara revealed the existence of a rogue military faction known as the Claws of Rekthar, a group of elite Zarnathian soldiers who viewed the surrender as a betrayal. They operated in the shadows, using guerrilla tactics to disrupt the fragile peace. Lyanna, ever the strategist, provided details about the political dynamics within the Zarnathian Council. Many council members were secretly funding the Claws, hoping to destabilize Mark's leadership and force a return to war. Shira, to Mark's surprise, shared knowledge of an ancient Zarnathian artifact known as the Heart of Unity. The artifact, a symbol of leadership and trust, had been hidden away by K'tal's regime. To the Zarnathian people, its recovery would signify the legitimacy of Mark's position as their leader. Mark listened intently, piecing together the web of threats and opportunities. It became clear that if he wanted to solidify peace, he would need to address both the military and political threats while also finding the heart of unity. Building trust. The collaboration wasn't easy. Zara remained skeptical, constantly challenging Mark's decisions. Lyanna, though cooperative, was cautious, always weighing the risks. Shira, while supportive, kept her cards close to her chest, her true motivations still unclear. To bridge the gap, Mark began spending more time with each of them, learning their strengths and building trust. With Zara, he sparred in the ship's training room, proving that he wasn't just a diplomat, but a warrior capable of standing his ground. Their matches were intense, and though Zara often emerged victorious, she began to respect Mark's determination. With Lyanna, he worked on strategies to counter the rogue factions. Late nights in the war room brought them closer, their shared commitment to peace forming a bond of mutual respect. With Shira, the interactions were quieter, but no less significant. She guided him through Zarnathian cultural practices, teaching him the rituals and symbols that would earn the trust of her people. During these moments, Mark glimpsed a softer side of Shira, though her guarded nature never fully wavered. The turning point. The alliance between Mark and the wives was put to the test when intelligence came in about a planned attack on a Zarnathian settlement. The claws of Rekthar had planted explosives near a key power station, intending to frame humanity for the destruction. If successful, the attack would reignite hostilities. Mark knew this was a critical moment. Acting decisively, he assembled a joint team of human and Zarnathian forces to intercept the attackers. Zara insisted on leading the ground team, while Lyanna coordinated from the ship, using her tactical expertise to outmaneuver the enemy. Shira, to everyone's surprise, volunteered to infiltrate the settlement and deactivate the explosives. The mission was fraught with danger, but for the first time, Mark saw the wives working together, their combined efforts turning the tide. Zara's combat skills, Lyanna's intellect, and Shira's bravery saved countless lives, and the successful operation marked a turning point in their fragile alliance. A fragile victory. As the dust settled, Mark stood with the three wives, surveying the aftermath. The power station was intact, the settlement safe, and the claws of Rekthar thwarted. For now. You did well, Zara admitted grudgingly, wiping blood from her blade. Maybe you're not as useless as I thought. Lyanna offered a small smile. This is only the beginning. There's still much to do. Shira said nothing, but when Mark looked at her, she gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of his leadership. For the first time, Mark felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just allies now. They were a team. But as they returned to the ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was still ahead. The final test. The success of the mission to save the Zarnathian settlement had earned Captain Mark Ryan some goodwill, but it wasn't enough. The rogue factions were still active, the claws of Rekthar remained a threat, and Mark's position as a leader was precarious. The Zarnathian people were watching closely, judging his every move. If he couldn't prove himself worthy of their trust, the fragile peace would crumble. It was during this time that a summons arrived. An unexpected and daunting challenge. The Zarnathian High Council, in an effort to solidify Mark's legitimacy, had demanded that he undergo the trial of sovereignty, a series of ancient tests reserved for leaders who sought to unify the Zarnathian people. The announcement. Mark stood in the center of the High Council chamber, surrounded by towering Zarnathian dignitaries. Their scaled forms glittered in the light of bioluminescent orbs, their expressions unreadable. At the head of the chamber, a council elder spoke, his voice deep and resonant. Captain Mark Ryan of Earth, the elder declared, "You have chosen to accept our ways, to bind yourself to our people. But words are not enough. To lead, you must prove your strength, wisdom, and resolve. The trial of sovereignty will test these qualities. If you succeed, you will be recognized as a true leader. If you fail, you will not leave this chamber alive." The words hung in the air like a blade over Mark's head. He glanced at the three wives standing nearby. Zara looked unimpressed, Lyanna was calm and analytical, and Shira's veiled face betrayed no emotion. "What does this trial involve?" Mark asked, keeping his voice steady. "There are three challenges," the elder replied. "The trial of strength, the trial of strategy, and the trial of truth. Each will test a different aspect of your character. You may seek counsel from those you trust, but in the end, the decisions are yours alone." Mark nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's begin." The trial of strength. The first trial took place in the council's combat arena, a vast chamber lined with jagged stone walls. Mark faced a hulking Zarnathian warrior, a member of the claws of Rekthar. The crowd murmured in anticipation, eager to see how a human would fare against one of their own. Zara approached Mark before the match. "This isn't just about brute strength," she said. "The Zarnathians respect resilience. Don't try to overpower him. You won't win. Focus on endurance and adaptability. The bell sounded, and the fight began. The warrior charged at Mark with terrifying speed, his 4 arms swinging massive blades. Mark dodged the first few strikes, his training kicking in. He knew he couldn't match the warrior's raw power, but he could outthink him. The battle was grueling, each clash of weapons echoing through the arena. Mark used the environment to his advantage, forcing the warrior into tighter spaces where his size became a disadvantage. Finally, after what felt like hours, Mark landed a decisive blow, disarming the warrior and earning the crowd's reluctant applause. The trial of strategy. The second trial took place in the council's war chamber. Mark was presented with a holographic simulation of a galactic conflict, a complex scenario involving limited resources, multiple factions, and conflicting objectives. His task was to achieve peace without sacrificing too many lives. Lyanna stepped forward to advise him. "The key is balance," she said. "Every choice has consequences. Think several steps ahead, and don't be afraid to make sacrifices for the greater good." Mark dove into the simulation, making careful decisions as the scenario unfolded. He negotiated alliances, diverted resources, and outmaneuvered hostile forces. At one point, he faced a choice: sacrifice a key ally to save a civilian population or risk escalating the war. He chose the civilians, earning the respect of the council, but complicating the simulation's outcome. When the simulation ended, Mark had achieved peace, imperfect but effective. The council acknowledged his effort, though not without some criticism. Lyanna, however, seemed pleased. "You made the right call," she said quietly. "Sometimes imperfection is the best outcome." The trial of truth. The final trial was the most mysterious. Mark was led into a chamber filled with shimmering crystals that seemed to hum with energy. Shura accompanied him, her presence both comforting and enigmatic. "The trial of truth is not about strength or strategy," Shura explained. "It is about your soul. The crystals will reveal your deepest fears, your darkest secrets. You must confront them and remain true to who you are." As Mark stepped into the chamber, the crystals began to glow brighter. Visions appeared before him. Images of the war, the friends he had lost, the mistakes he had made. He saw himself making decisions that led to unnecessary casualties, moments where his judgment had failed. One vision stood out: a young Zarnathian child crying in the rubble of a destroyed village. Mark recognized the scene. It was from a battle he had commanded. The child's eyes were filled with fear and hatred, a reflection of the damage he had caused. Mark felt a wave of guilt and shame, but he didn't turn away. "I made mistakes," he said aloud, his voice trembling. "I'm not perfect, but I'll carry these memories with me and use them to guide my actions. I won't let them define me, but I won't forget them either." The crystals pulsed brightly, and the visions faded. Shura stepped forward, her veiled face close to his. "You passed," she whispered. "The crystals see truth, and they saw yours." A leader emerges. When Mark returned to the council chamber, he stood tall despite his exhaustion. The elder approached him, his expression solemn. "Captain Mark Ryan," the elder proclaimed, "you have completed the trial of sovereignty. You have proven your strength, strategy, and truth. You are now recognized as a leader of the Zarnathian people." The chamber erupted in applause, but Mark knew this was only the beginning. The trials had tested him, but the real challenge lay ahead, leading a divided people toward unity and peace. As he left the chamber, the 3 wives joined him. Zara gave him a nod of respect, Lyanna offered a small smile, and Shura's enigmatic presence lingered beside him. "You've earned our trust," Shura said softly. "Now let's see if you can keep it." Mark couldn't help but smile. "I intend to." A new beginning. Captain Mark Ryan stood on the observation deck of the Zarnathian flagship, gazing out at the stars. The trials were behind him, but their weight lingered. He had proven himself in combat, strategy, and truth, earning the respect of the Zarnathian High Council and the tentative trust of the people. Yet, Mark knew that trust was fragile. The peace he had worked so hard to secure was not an endpoint. It was the beginning of an even greater challenge. Behind him, the three wives approached, their footsteps soft against the polished floor. Zara was the first to speak, her tone carrying a hint of begrudging admiration. "You've surprised me, human," she said. "I didn't think you had it in you to survive our trials, let alone pass them." Mark turned to face her, offering a small smile. "I didn't survive them alone. Each of you helped me in your own way." Zara crossed her arms, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. "Don't expect me to get sentimental about it. I only helped because failure would have made us all look weak." Lyanna stepped forward, her expression calm and measured as always. Whether or not she admits it, Zara's right about one thing. Your success reflects on all of us. But this is just the beginning. The factions opposing you won't disappear overnight. And the people still have doubts, Shira added softly, her veil shimmering in the dim light. They've been hurt by war, and trust doesn't come easily. Mark nodded, absorbing their words. Then we'll give them reasons to trust. But first, we need to deal with the factions once and for all. A plan for unity. The four of them gathered in the war room, poring over intelligence reports. The claws of Rekthar had retreated to a remote moon, where they were regrouping. Their leader, Commander Rekthar himself, had made it clear that he would never accept a human as a leader. "They see me as a symbol of everything they've lost," Mark said, leaning over the holographic map. "If I go after them with brute force, it'll only prove them right." Lyanna tapped the map, highlighting key points on the moon's surface. "Then we need to outmaneuver them. A direct assault isn't the answer, but we can target their supply lines and isolate them, cut off their ability to fight." "And then what?" Zara asked, her tone skeptical. "Starve them into submission. They'll never bow to you, no matter what." Mark glanced at Shira, who had been silent so far. "What do you think?" Shira's voice was quiet but firm. "They don't need to bow. They need to see that this union isn't about domination. It's about survival. Show them that fighting you is a fight against their own future." Mark considered her words, an idea forming in his mind. "Then we don't just cut off their supplies. We show them what they're missing by refusing peace. Let's send a team to the moon, not to fight, but to negotiate. If they refuse, we'll have no choice but to act. But if they listen—" "It's a risky move," Zara said, though there was no mockery in her tone this time. "But it might just work." The final confrontation. Mark led the mission himself, accompanied by Zara, Lyanna, and Shira. The journey to the moon was tense, the atmosphere heavy with uncertainty. When they arrived, the claws of Rekthar greeted them with hostility, their weapons drawn. Commander Rekthar, a massive Zarnathian with dark, jagged scales, stepped forward. His eyes burned with hatred as he addressed Mark. "You dare come here, human? You think your trials mean anything to us? You're nothing but a usurper." Mark raised his hands, showing he was unarmed. "I'm not here to fight, Commander. I'm here to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Rekthar growled. "You represent weakness, betrayal. Our leader gave you everything, and you took it." "I didn't take anything," Mark replied, his voice calm but firm. "I accepted a responsibility, one that comes with sacrifice. I didn't ask for this, but I won't walk away from it either." Rekthar sneered. "You think words will change anything?" "They might," Mark said. "But if you keep fighting, you're not just fighting me. You're fighting your own people. The people who want peace, who are tired of losing their loved ones. Is that the legacy you want?" Rekthar hesitated, his expression hardening. But before he could respond, Shira stepped forward, removing her veil. The sight of her face, unguarded and vulnerable, seemed to stun the gathered soldiers. "Our people don't need more war," Shira said, her voice steady. "They need hope. And whether you like it or not, Captain Ryan has given them that. If you truly care about this Arnathian future, you'll give him a chance. The turning point. The tension in the air was palpable as Rekthar stared at Shara, then back at Mark. Finally, he lowered his weapon. You have one chance, human. Prove that your peace is more than just words. Mark nodded, relief washing over him. I intend to. The other soldiers followed suit, lowering their weapons and stepping back. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step forward. A united future. Back aboard the flagship, Mark addressed the combined human and Zarnathian forces. The rogue factions had been neutralized, their leaders brought to the negotiating table. For the first time since the war ended, there was a sense of cautious optimism. Zara, Lyanna, and Shira stood by his side as he spoke. This isn't just about peace between two peoples, Mark said. It's about building something stronger, something better. Together, we've proven that unity is possible. Now, it's up to us to make it last. The crowd erupted in applause, a mix of human and Zarnathian voices echoing through the chamber. As the noise subsided, Mark turned to the three wives, his partners in this unlikely alliance. We did it, he said quietly. This is just the beginning, Lyanna replied, her tone as pragmatic as ever. But it's a good beginning, Shira added, her eyes glinting with quiet hope. Zara smirked. Don't get too comfortable, Captain. There's still plenty of work to do. Mark laughed softly. I wouldn't have it any other way. As they looked out at the stars, the future stretched before them, uncertain, challenging, but full of possibility.